I'm Anita Brickman. I lead communications and public affairs at CHPA, the Consumer Healthcare Products Association, and I am joined by Lisa Kent of the Luminations Group. Hey, Lisa.
Hello.
Let's get to the interview itself with our special guest, Lisa Kent. Now, she was nominated by another member of the Women's Leadership Forum as a, quote, dynamic leader, great marketer, and a long-standing champion for women. Lisa's company, the Luminations Group, was comprised mainly of women at the beginning who, after having kids, preferred a more flexible work environment. The Luminations Group provided both a lucrative income and a flexible schedule for these mothers to play a larger, more present role in their children's lives while still having rewarding careers at a strategic level. So let's talk about one of the key things that came up in my introduction to you, work-life balance. I know it has certainly been a challenge for me at different times in my career as a communicator. How did you balance it in the past? How do you do it now?
Great question. And I would say, and I think I say this in my book too, there's really no such thing as balance in one moment in time. What we have to do is decide what are our priorities at a given moment. And that might be a big presentation at work, and it might be a Little League game. And we have to acknowledge that we won't be able to balance everything at once all the time, but that we pick our priorities carefully and balance day by day. It's okay to say you have kids and kids are your priority. Whereas 25, 30 years ago, that was something we hid, snuck off to a Halloween parade or a concert versus celebrated it. And if you ask me, we value parents much more today in terms of their understanding of our consumers, many of whom are in fact the consumers we need to market to in our businesses.
Very, very well said. Now, things have changed. I would agree with you as well over the span of my career, and that has been really exciting to see. But there are still some areas that are some industries that are very much male dominated. Any advice for women trying to break into those?
Don't be afraid. Have confidence in yourself, and if you don't, fake it until you do. And recognize that your intelligence and your experience is relevant whatever industry you're in. At Luminations, we work in the CPG world, but we also work in technology and home goods and applications development. And these are very male-dominated fields, but it doesn't mean that they don't value the understanding of a consumer insight. And yes, sometimes you need to understand what it takes to relate to the men in the room. I had a boss once tell me, you know, did you ever notice that in our Monday morning meetings, we always talk about the Sunday Times and the sports section of the Sunday Times? And I said, yeah, I did notice that. And I felt left out. I was the only woman in the room. And he said, well, do you have the Sunday Times? And I said, yeah, I read it every weekend. He said, well, read the sports page. Okay, I read the sports page. Actually, it was pretty interesting. And in fact, had something to talk about with the folks in the room. You need to be able to connect on some level. Doing good work means connection.
Let's go ahead and move on through to the next slide. Here are some of the key takeaways that Lisa has provided us. Now, all of these are going to be sent. There's a lot to go through here. All of these are going to be sent in a nicely cleaned up PDF for you that will follow this webinar. These takeaways are from her books. Let's be specific on marketing. What would be the main thing you want people to take away on marketing? Talk to me about that.
So we're all drowning in data today. And that's a good thing and a bad thing, right? We can leverage it and we should leverage it. And getting our arms around the voluminous amounts of data is important. So learning what's critical and how to analyze it is something that's important to success. We may not need to look at all the data. We need to figure out what is the data we need to get our arms around. And then secondarily, equally important, and this happens as you develop in your career, trust your gut. So there's data, and then there's instinct and intuition. Leverage the data, use dashboards to help you analyze, and think hard what does your gut tell you? That's data. I would also say that if we're not careful, we can be overwhelmed by it. And so
Right.
thinking about how to determine what's important is a priority in doing business well.
Well, I think that's very good advice.
Other key takeaways, just thinking about marketing. One has to do with strategy. I say vehicles change. I'm writing a course, I told you now, on mobile marketing technologies. What exists today will be very different tomorrow. Technologies change, the types of marketing change, but good strategy never does. So if you have to focus on anything early in your career, learn how to generate great strategy. And with us, when we teach that, we teach very simply, what questions do you need to ask to develop a strategy? And the third thing I think that I talked about was putting the consumer at the center, putting the consumer, the customer, or the patient at the center of everything that we do. So remembering to put the consumer or the customer or the patient at the center of everything we do will not steer us wrong. And that also has not changed over time.
It is that human component we can't lose sight of in the numbers. Before we move on, I do understand we have a question. Carly?
Our question that we just received is, what advice would you give women in the middle stage of their careers versus those just getting started about how to determine the best professional path for you?
So my mom always says, you don't have to know what you want to be when you grow up, just what you want to do next. So think about what you want to do next and what you want to learn next and what you want to add to your portfolio of skills. And then the journey comes. The next thing will happen and you'll decide, is that right for you? But don't put pressure on yourself, middle of career or even early in career, on deciding what that whole path is going to look like. So just think about, what do you want to do next? And don't worry about the rest.
I love that advice. If we do anything long enough, it's not going to be that trajectory right up that mountain. We're going to fail. What is your advice in failing and getting up and keeping going?
Well, so you basically said it. You have to pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and move on. And I think as women, and I can certainly say for myself, I'm very much of a perfectionist. So I take it hard when I fail at something. And believe me, I do fail at things. And so we have to recognize that that's a learning experience and not just a failure. It's not a black mark. It could be a green mark, because failing teaches us something that if we quickly move on, learn from it, can make us stronger, better, faster.
Let's move on to our next slide of some of your key takeaways on work and family.
Okay.
So we did talk about that there's no way to balance everything all the time, and you've got to just have those shifting priorities and be okay with that. What I like is the statement, our kids will grow up and move out, but we're probably going to work until we're 75. I'm not sure if I'm going to make it to 75, but I am at the stage where I'm almost an empty nester. And it's daunting in some ways, but it's also exciting. Talk about that whole idea of like the marathon, not the sprint.
I'll tell you that our work careers are going to be long. Maybe you're not going to work till you're 75, but you're going to work for a long time. And during that period, you'll have your ups and downs, and it will be important to grow and develop and get promoted. But that window of time when you have a child at home, that's pretty finite. That's less time than our careers for most of us. And it goes by in the blink of an eye. Now, I say that, and I also say that as women, we're not great about networking all the time. When we have to make a trade-off, we often pick our families. So don't take lightly networking opportunities at work that other people may take advantage of. Choose wisely, choose carefully, something with your family and something with your business.
I try to do that every day, which leads us to the next thing, which is about gratitude, something I try to practice every day. I do better some days than others. So let's go to the next slide if we can, and talk to me a little bit about the aspect of learning and gratitude. I hadn't thought of those two together until I saw your key takeaways.
I put it in this category because to me, learning is a gift. And so that goes in my category of gratitude. And as you know, I try to do a lot of teaching and giving back as a result. I talked already about the quote from my mom, so we can skip over that.
Next one I love. It's the idea of like putting things into perspective. Make a great point here. We've got to remember that we are rarely risking our lives, or that other people's lives are not completely dependent on what we do.
Right, which is not to say what we do isn't important, and in fact, a lot of us are working in healthcare and do impact people's lives. But stepping back and having some perspective. If you have a bad day, if your presentation doesn't go the way that you planned, if you make a recommendation that didn't work out well, okay. So now we learn and we move on, and to do that thing we talked about earlier, which is learning from failure instead of beating ourselves up when we might have a failure or an outcome that we don't like.
Yeah, wow. All right. Thank you so much. I'm Anita Brickman. Lisa, thank you so much for joining us. This was a fantastic discussion.
Thanks, and join CHIPA if you're not a member. It's worth it, and they listen.